everyone, welcome to your next lecture. Today we're going to be talking about a new data type, a data type that we've talked about a little bit, but go more in depth on this thing called strings, and we're going to talk about a term called slicing. So when we talked about integers and floats, we talked a lot about arithmetic operations. Now, as I said before, you can't really do arithmetic operations on strings really, like you can't divide tree by hello. What you can do with strings, however, is something else. Python is actually really good at doing something called natural language processing, which is almost like a type of machine learning that takes in text and tries to get some sort of analysis or some sort of metric for it. One popular one would be sentiment. So you can use string slicing and natural language processing with Python to determine if a sentence is a happy or sad sounding sentence, using like linguistic rules as well as some coding tricks. So strings are really powerful and interesting that way. Remember that they are alphanumeric character sets that have all this information packed into them. So what you're going to learn today is you're going to learn all about strings. We're going to spend a lot of time just kind of fuddling around with strings and how to manipulate aspects of the variable. We're going to store some strings into memory, into a variable, and play around with ways of extracting stuff from them. So that's what we're going to learn about formatting our strings. We're going to learn about how we can get certain position values for characters within a string and kind of slice them up and do all kinds of different manipulations to them. I'm going to tell you a little bit about special characters in strings. This is an important feature of a lot of natural language processing. You're going to want to sometimes keep the position of where text is in your body of text. So sometimes you want a line break, like an enter, or a tab or something like that. So there are a handful of special characters that are reserved in Python. So I'm going to show you how to avoid the pitfalls of dealing with strings and those kinds of special characters. And then lastly, we're going to play with a couple of string functions to introduce you to how there are actually default processes that you can run on an object or a variable right after you save it. Okay, so let's move on to our definitions here. So remember from before, a string is just like it's a data type like an integer or a float. It has alphanumeric information and it can contain special characters. So that means alphanumeric, it means it can contain numbers. It can be, you can have numbers in a string. It's totally fine. It's just represented as a string and not an integer. There are other things that can be included in it. And then special characters being like line breaks or even like the exclamation point. That's not exactly an alphanumeric, it's a symbol. So you can have different symbols as a string as well. So when I talk about indexing, I'm going to be talking about how to select information within the string data type. We're going to learn how to do indexing for other types of data types, things called lists and dictionaries later. However, you're going to be first introduced to indexing with a string, which is probably the most simple way to think about indexing before moving on to those types. And then lastly, we're going to show you some special characters, which are these, line breaks and tabs and stuff. And basically, they are in a string, they are represented by having a backward slash. I'm going to show you what that means, but if you have a backward slash and then some character next to it, it means that this is a special character that will be represented differently when that text is output. Okay, so let's just move into a syntax example. I'm going to show you how to save a string again and then go through indexing and formatting and how indexing works before jumping into code. Okay, everyone, so here we are. First thing you're going to notice is that we're going to assign a string to a variable. Now, this string is pretty complicated, and that's on purpose because I'm going to go through this one step at a time. I'm going to introduce a couple of things here. And then we're going to move on to this, which is indexing, and then this is a function with your variable. So first off, we are going to assign a string to this variable called first string. I remember how I do that. First, we label our variable, we name our box, our container, and then we use the assignment variable, the assign operator, and then we give it the value that we want the variable to represent. And remember that to assign a string to a variable, you can't just you can't you have to use quotes, basically, either the double parentheses or a single parentheses. Now, it has to be on both sides, okay? So you can't have a double here and a single one here. They have to be wrapped in the same type of parentheses. Now, you're also going to notice a couple of other interesting things about this string. First off, let's just go through some of the basics, all right? If we were to just have this as a string, data, that would just be data there, but we have this other thing here. Remember, this is what we called an escape character because it has this backslash. And now I'm using a coding text editor, and you can kind of notice that this is a slightly different color than the data part here. And that's because my text editor has recognized that this is in fact a special character within a string, and it's giving me a visual representation so my eyes can see it. So this is a line break, and so if we were to like output this string for, I don't know, in our code, we're going to print the result of this string, or like have this information saved somewhere. All other languages should know, or if they're parsed properly, that this is in fact a line break. You'll also notice that in this example, I have double quotations wrapped, but single quotations are in here. So that means that you can, if you have double quote, like if you're wrapping something in double quotations, you can use single quotations just fine, and it doesn't break anything. That might make it easier for some of the things that you're doing with your code later on. It might not, but it is something that is a feature of string types in Python, that you can do this, that it won't break your string assignment. But one other thing you'll notice here is that I do in fact have a double quote inside this string. Although I said that double quotes can't be used within the string assign the value itself, because how is it going to know when the string ends here? But because we have this special character, Python knows that, okay, well, this is not the closing double quote. This is a double quote that is inside the string, and we want to keep that double quote. Okay? So you can do that kind of stuff with your strings in order to get kind of force some characters in there. These are just some rules of string variables in Python. Okay, so we're going to look at what this outputs as in Python later. Next thing I want to talk to you guys about is indexing. So what indexing is for strings is it's a way to access very specific information within a string. You want like the first four characters, let's say, or you want to remove these characters here, or you want to only get these characters here. How you do that is through a process called indexing, which means that if you have an object here, we've assigned this variable as a string, which is our data science rules thing, and we've wrapped the next part around in square brackets. What that means is that we want to access specific information from this object. For strings, that means that we want to access specific characters. And there's a bunch of different rules that you can put into this index feature for other data types as well, like lists, for instance, that will allow you to kind of like very quickly cherry pick the things that you need from a big piece of text or an object. So how this works is, what this is saying is, we want to access only the characters but from position 0 up to 4. And how characters are indexed in Python is very simple. Every position of this string is indexed by a number. So D, we start with 0 in Python. Some languages start with 1, but first position for Python and indexing is 0. We count from 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Okay? So what this is saying is, remember I said this is up to, this is not to 4, it's going to be something like this. If the output of this will be, try and guess, but I'm going to do it very slowly. So if we start with 0, it's going to be D, and then A, that's 1, 2, and 3. Because we said up to 4. So that's how this positioning works in Python for indexing. Okay, if you want to call the first 4 characters, you do from starting from 0 and positioning upwards. Now let's say I was doing 1 instead here, and yeah, we'll just leave it at 4. What would we expect as a output now? It would be A, T, A. Why? Because position 1 is A, position 2 is T, and position 3 is A, and it goes up to 4. Okay? So that's how you index a string in Python. Lastly, I want to introduce using default functions on a class or a string. So what is going on here is that because Python knows that this is a string, you use your type parentheses function to determine if this is a string or an integer. It's in fact a string. If you look at the different modules that are available in Python, you'll notice that you can use specific functions on the object. So what this function does for strings, how you call a function onto this string, is that because it's a default function for this class, you just go, you do dot, and then the function name, and then it always has to have parentheses. You don't necessarily have to have anything filled in for a function like this. Sometimes there are defaults. In this case, we're leaving it blank for defaults, and you're going to learn more about how this all works in a later chapter. Just accept that as knowledge and axiomatic for now, and we'll go into that in greater detail later. Okay, so what we would get from this is that what this does is it uppercases all letters in a string. So if we ran this, the output will be data. I'm not going to do the whole thing. Data. Now remember, we have a line break here, so it's actually going to go like that. Science. And then we'll see what the rest of the output will be when we do this in Python. Okay, so what you have just learned from syntax here is some features of strings, what you can put into strings, what will break strings, what won't. You learned about positioning and indexing strings and how to access that information. You learned a little bit of formatting by basically learning how you can run default functions onto your string objects, but that you can do this also with integer and float data.